everyone, I'm Izzy at Minerva. In today's series we're picking up where we left off last week, where we drafted out our bespoke body block. Today we're going to look at adding seam allowances to our block to create our block pattern, and then how to transfer those markings onto calico and how to sew it up neatly and accurately. I'll be talking you through the process step by step today. This is going to be loads of fun, so let's get straight on into it. You're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools in today's video. So you're going to need your bespoke block, which you drew with me last week. You're going to need the following list of equipment, which is listed right here for you. So go and grab your tracing paper and a nice sharp pencil, and let's get straight on into it. So this is the block that I drew last week. This is my block, and your block is going to look different to mine. That's totally fine because your body measurements will be different to mine, and that's the whole point of doing this, isn't it? To get something which is completely bespoke. So roughly speaking, it will look similar with the neck on the left-hand side and the hip down on the right-hand side of the screen. Now the reason why for the dress block we've only drawn to the hip is simply because that's the widest part of our body, and from there we can either go in or out, it doesn't really matter, but that's the kind of bit of the curve we really want to follow. Now our block is drawn as if it is our exact body. It hasn't got any allowance to add seams or to sew bits together, and obviously we want to be sewing the back to the front. We've got a side seam, and we also need to be able to get into our dress as well, so we need to add an allowance for a zip as well at the back potentially. So let's add our seam allowances where we need to. We are not going to be adding seam allowances, however, to our arm side or to our neck. Now the reason for this is because we're not attaching anything onto our neck at this point, and we're not attaching anything onto our arm side. We're not attaching our sleeves. We've not done a sleeve block yet to attach on. So we're only going to add seam allowances to the block where things need to be sewn together. Start off by drawing in your neckline. We are not adding a seam allowance to the neckline because we're not attaching it to anything, and we're just checking what our block looks like. Add a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to the shoulder seam because we're going to be attaching the back to the front. Draw in your dart. Draw in the arm side. Again, we're not attaching a sleeve to this block, we're just checking the block is correct. So we sew it up, so no seam allowance is required at this point. Then draw in your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to your side seam. When you hit the hip line, it's completely up to you as to how long you want your garment. In terms of fit, it doesn't make any difference. So draw a line however long you want it to be. For me, I'm just going to extend this garment about 30 centimeters below the hip line. Then just square that across to create your hemline. And again, at this point, we've got no seam allowance because we're not attaching the hem to anything. However, we do want to put a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance down the centre back, all the way down to the hemline, because we're going to create our back opening at this point and insert a zip. Draw in your waist dart at the back. Next, we're going to draw some lines on our pattern piece for our bust, waist and hips. Now the reason we're going to do that on our pattern piece is so that when we come to ascertain the balance of our fit of our garment and to check that, we can more clearly see when we look at the fabric garment on us if those lines are running parallel to each other as we sort of circle round and look at the back to the front, or whether they're sort of raised up or dropped down. Now we do have a video that we've done previously all about resolving the balance of the garment, so these reference points are going to be really helpful for that video too, if that is one of your fit adjustments that you need to do. Draw in your waistline, hip line and bust line. Okay, let's annotate our pattern piece now. Our grain line runs parallel to the centre back. Basically now we have traced around and added our seam allowances where we need to on our back pattern piece. That's brilliant, but because this is a test and we're looking at how to fit our block really nicely and accurately, I'm now going to mark on with a dashed line where my stitch line is on the pattern piece, so that when I come to stitch it together I can make sure I'm lining everything up beautifully, because we're wanting to get this as accurate as possible. So draw all of those in as shown. Now usually when you're attaching a front to a back, the side seams will have notches on them to annotate where the front piece and the back piece are going to sort of match up and line up. We, however, already have our waistline and our hip line and our bust line already marked, so those effectively can become areas where you could put notches into your patterns if you wanted to. I'm not going to annotate that on our pattern pieces today because we're going to actually be sewing those onto the garment. Let's now move on to our front pattern piece. Draw in the neckline. Draw in the bust dart from the neck down to the apex, back up again. Add the seam allowance to the shoulder seam. At this point, I would then find the centre of the dart and then just extend that shoulder seam all the way up to the centre of that dart line, and then just extend it back down to the neck point. Draw in the arm side, and the seam allowance to the side seam is 1.5 centimetres. And in the same way that we did for the back, we're just going to extend that by 30 centimetres and then square across. Our centre front is actually going to be cut on the fold because we've got our zip opening at the back, so we want that all to be nice and smooth so we can clearly see what's happening at the front. So there is no seam allowance to the centre front. Draw in your waist dart. Next we'll just add our stitch lines as we've done for the back, with a nice little dashed line all the way around the pattern piece. Let's add some standard annotations to say we're going to place this part on the fold. And our grain line runs parallel to our centre front. It's always helpful just to annotate where the apex is. Give our pattern piece a name next. Izzy front block, cut 1 on fold. And then finally, we're just going to draw in the hip line, the waist line, and what we've called the bust line, but is basically sitting right at the base of the arm side. Excellent. Now that we've added all of our seam allowances, we're just going to cut that out. Grab your calico and fold it in half lengthways, parallel with the selvage. The front I'm going to place on the fold, and I'm just lining up really nicely and neatly, and then just pin it in place all the way around. Make sure you're pinning the pattern as close as possible to the edge of the pattern piece so that you've got a really nice connection between the edge of the pattern and the fabric that you're pinning it to. Once you've pinned your pattern piece really nicely and neatly and accurately onto your fabric, then cut it out using your preferred method, either with scissors or a rotary blade. Now on my block I decided just to extend it a little bit further down the bottom pattern piece, just as a design preference, just because I wanted to have a little bit more coverage down there. Wonderful. Once you've cut out your lovely little pattern pieces, we're then going to start to use our dressmaker's carbon paper and our tracing wheel. So grab your carbon paper and fold it in half so that you've got the carbon transfer paper side on both sides of the piece of paper. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to work on this dart to start off with. Take out any pins that you need to, and then open up the garment so that you've obviously got 2 pieces of fabric here, and you want to slip the carbon paper in between those 2 pieces. Grab your tracing wheel and then just trace over the dart. Next, trace along the centre back, along the stitch line. Trace over the hip line and up the side seam. Continue all the stitch lines in the same manner. Brilliant. Once you've finished transferring the annotations using your carbon paper and tracing wheel on the back pattern piece, just repeat that whole process for the front. Now, if I take my pattern piece off and I have a look on the inside of the fabric, so this is effectively going to be the wrong side of the fabric, you will see that we've got a whole load of beautiful carbon paper line markings. So we can see those darts beautifully, exactly where they are, and we can see the side seam stitch line as well, which is just perfect, isn't it? So that's a really nice and simple way of just transferring your line markings. The first thing we're going to do is to sew our bust line, waistline and hip line using a long basting stitch. Now you can do this by hand or you can do it on your sewing machine. Repeat this process for all 3 pattern pieces, the 2 back pieces and the 1 front piece. Make sure you're using a contrasting thread so that you can just really clearly see those balance lines when you try the garment on. Okay, we're going to move on to the dart now. We're going to sew this big central dart to the back pattern piece. I'll demo on this one and then you can just repeat the whole process for all of the other darts. So pinch the 2 ends of the dart together and then just fold it in half like that. When we sew the darts, we're going to be sewing from the waistline out to the point of the dart. So really what we want is for our pins to be orientated pointing towards the waistline. Pin it on one side and then just check that the pin has gone all the way through to the other side properly and is going through the dots that you've got on the other side of the dart as well. It hasn't quite done that for me, so I'm just going to shift the fabric a little bit until the pin is going directly through both lines on either side of the dart. Continue to pin the rest of the dart all the way down to the point, and then just repeat that process for the other half of the dart. So we've pinned it all the way along that dart really nicely. Can you see that the pins are aligning really nicely with the marks on this side of the fabric? And then on the other side, if we flip it over, you can see that the pins are pointing directly through that red dotted line on the other side. Okay, so we're now going to sew it, and we're going to sew starting at the waist and continuing all the way along to the point. We're going to sew using our standard stitch length from the waist out to the point of the dart. As we reach the point of the dart, we're going to reduce our stitch length slowly so that it reduces down to 1mm stitch length or there and thereabouts. We're then going to sew off the point of the dart and cut the thread so that we've got a nice length of thread so we can tie a knot at the base of the dart. We do not want to reinforce the stitches at the end of the dart simply because that creates a bit of bulk at the point, and we want a nice smooth transition from the point all the way around the fabric. With those 2 ends of the thread, just tie them into a nice double knot to secure the end of the dart. Once you've sewn one side of the dart, we're then going to repeat the whole process for the other side, starting at the waist and going up to the bust line. So there we have it. You can see that our stitch line has really nicely followed our carbon paper dotted line. And if we turn it over on the other side, it's the same. The stitches are nice and accurate. So now just go and repeat the whole process of sewing all of your darts on all the other pattern pieces. It's worth noting that at the top of the garment, like at the shoulder dart, you're just going to pinch it out like that and then sew from the raw edge down to the point. Brilliant. So once you've sewn all of your beautiful darts, what we're then going to do is iron them. We are going to iron all of our darts so they're pressed towards our side seams. So here's my centre back. I've got 2 darts here, one at the top at the shoulder. Now I'm going to use this tailor's ham. If you've not got one of these, you could just roll up some old towels into a nice tight tube. And all that does is it allows you to kind of curve the shape of the dart over that nice curve of the tailor's ham. So push your dart towards the side, grab your iron and very simply just press it in place, making sure that you're going nicely over that curve. This is with the wrong side facing up. And then you see we've got a nice flat curve and there's no jagged point at the end because we've done it over the curve of this. Now, as we hit the bigger dart here, again, we want to locate the point of the dart over the curve of this bit here. So just going to pop it on like that. Get it so it's nice and curvy over there. And just press one side to start off with. And we're pressing it towards the side seam. And the same with the other one. That's looking really nice. Brilliant. So just go and repeat that process for all of your other darts. Okay, brilliant. So we've got the right side of the garment of the dress facing up. This is the front facing up. And all we're going to do now is just sew our side seams together. So with right sides together, pop your back over your front and pin the side seam together. Now, normally when we pin things, I like to pin them perpendicular to the raw edge like that, so that you can easily pull your pins out if you want to. However, because we're doing a very detailed and accurate sew, we are going to pin using the same method as we did for our darts, which means that we're going to be pinning parallel to the raw edge, and we're going to make sure that we're pinning directly through our guidelines of our stitch lines. So pin the top and then pin the waist, making sure to match up the lines that you've got here nice and accurately. Then pin your hip line and pin your hem. Once you've got your 4 key pins all sorted, just pin in between. Now at this point you may want to consider using a slightly longer stitch length so that if you need to unpick this first toile, if it's too tight, then it's just easier to unpick if you increase your stitch length a little bit. Great, let's sew that together now. Excellent, so we've done the side seam, now let's do the shoulder seam. Pin that together using a similar method, lining up the arm side and also the neckline. Brilliant. Now that's all done. Let's repeat that whole process for the other side. Wow, this is looking really big now, isn't it? It's huge. Okay, brilliant. So the only final thing I want to do is right at the bottom of the garment, I'm just going to fold the 2 back pieces with right sides together like that. So we've got the 2 back pieces together. And all I'm going to do is pin from the hem up to the hips. Okay, so I'm just going to sew from the hem to about an inch and a half below the hip line, and that's simply so that when I put the garment on, I don't have to pin it all the way down to the floor. I've already got a nice little reference at that point, and then I can just pull the rest of it on over my body. I'm going to leave the top of it completely open so that I can get into my toile. Okay, let's go and press all of those seams open for now so that we can see exactly how it's going to look when it's on us. Let's go and take a look at that together now. Okay, so this is the first toile that I've done of my block, and there's a couple of fit issues. It's not looking too bad. A couple of things I'm going to want to resolve around the back and also the front. Just getting a feel for it. It feels like potentially the neck is too high, so I'm just going to lower that down to my collarbones at that point right there and just bring it all the way around nicely. Next thing I'm going to look at is my shoulder seam. It's looking like it's sitting a little bit too far back, so I just want to rotate that and bring it forward. I feel like the arms are okay. I might just bring that down a little bit. It feels like it's a little bit tight around there. And then around the hips, it's just too baggy, but it feels like the darts might just need to be lengthened slightly and brought in slightly as well. There's a little bit too much ease there. I could bring it around at the hips and try that, but I feel like the dart is probably the place to bring it out. Looking at the balance lines, it looks like it's a little bit higher up at the front. So just checking all of those and seeing what we need to do there. And finally, just making sure that we can sit down in the garment and that it's comfortable and we have enough ease as well. There is quite a lot of ease with this particular method of creating a block for your body. So I am expecting to have to take it in a little bit to shift things around a bit. And I know that my body always needs a shoulder adjustment as well at the seam. Those are just things that I often need. So I'm expecting there to be changes, and that's totally fine. And you should be expecting there to be changes at this point too. So go and try it on, and then if you see areas where you think they need to be fitted in a little bit more detail, you can refer back to our previous videos where I've gone through step by step over the common fit issues for the top, for the bodice, and also common fit issues for the skirt as well. So those videos are available and applicable for you to watch as you fit your dress block. So go and take a look at those and ascertain which fit adjustments you need to refine your block. Then make those alterations onto your block, sew it up again, check the fit again, and then you're ready to come back and join me next week as I start to show you different ways of adapting your block to make different types of dresses. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's really exciting to start to look at a new block and to see all the potential that that dress may well have. Don't forget that you can draft a sleeve referring back to video 69, where I talk you through the method of using your block to create a nice fitted sleeve. So you can start to see how this whole series is like jigsawing together now, isn't it? Like a jigsaw piece. It's all kind of fitting together. It's really exciting and the potential is huge. So we've done your bodice top, we've done a skirt block, we've done a sleeve block, and now we've done the dress block. Now, if you joined us to create the dress block at this point, but you haven't done the skirt or the bodice block, don't worry about it. You can simply cut your block in half at the waistline, your dress block, and then you have a skirt and a top block. It's just a different way of creating these blocks. It's a lot of fun. I've shown you a few different methods in terms of how to create the skirt and how to create the top, and I hope that all of these different methods and different ways of doing it are really helpful and insightful for you. As ever, please do leave your comments below. We love to hear from our maker community here at Minerva, and it's always great to read your comments and your thoughts and hear your journey as well. So don't forget to share your makes on social media as well. If you're following our pattern drafting series here at Minerva, I would absolutely love to see what you guys are all creating at home. So thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva. I'll see you next week for some nice dress drafting experiments.